Nice work. Mike? Okay.
Well, good morning. Thanks for joining us. The prospect of China as a market for an emerging company's goods and services, well, that's enough to make most founders and CEOs' hearts skip a few beats. It's a huge market, and we're still just scratching the surface of its potential on both the consumer and B2B sides. But scaling a business in China is also a daunting task, fraught with unknowns for most Western founders. Our panel today, our expert panel today, is going to help us get the inside track on how to enter and grow your company in the market. They might even make you second guess whether you want to. It's a big topic for a short discussion, so let's dive right in. Sally, I'd like to begin with the investor's perspective. High level, what are the options that a founder or CEO should be looking at with respect to how to enter the market strategically?
Yeah. I think over the years, we've seen three big buckets, right? You can either go on your own, hire your own teams, local experts, and you manage them with similar values and your strategy for the market. The second way of doing is maybe licensing. So that's the lighter touch way of getting into the market. You find a local partner, you do a revenue or profit sharing agreement. And the third way, somewhere in between, is forming a JV. And the structure of the JV, you can tailor with your partners. And I think on a higher level, those are the three main ways that you can consider going into the market.
All right, thank you. And I think we'll return to that framing over the course of our conversation. Bessie, as founder of WithinLink, I'd like to kind of get your perspective as a founder thinking about the pitch and the business plan and how a Western organization can go about making sure that they are developing a plan that's going to be attractive to a potential Chinese investor while staying true to the strategy that got them to this point. Mm-hmm. Your thoughts on that?
First of all, I have a correction because I was introduced as the WPP China. I'm no longer WPP. I left WPP end of April to focus on my own strategic investor and incubator company. Okay, so coming back to the question. Now, first of all, don't use any business plan templates, please. That's the questions I got asked a lot, in China. Do you have a template that I can borrow? No. Your business is your business. Talking to a Chinese investor is probably the same as talking to investors in the West. You need to articulate your business and your model clearly. And if you're talking to a Chinese investor about China market, you need to demonstrate to the Chinese investors why is your model so unique that there's no such player already in China, and then why there is such a need by the Chinese consumer, whether they're business consumers or they're your general consumers. Why do they have a need of your product, your solution in China that's not available yet in this market? And how are you going to find the money to sustain your business? So if your business idea is clear enough and strong enough, and you articulate it well, you don't really need any template. And don't come up with a 200-page presentation because you're going to lose them, 1/3 into your time. But be short, sweet, to the point, but compelling. So that would be my advice.
So at the fundamental level, the advice is actually very similar to any other market, Western or otherwise.
It is.
But Yiying, let's talk about localization and the need, presumably, to localize your branding, to localize your marketing, even your product innovation.
Yep.
Introduce us to this concept and help the audience understand what level of localization is going to be right for them.
So a bit of background, I have worked with hundreds of companies around the world, and I also have personally helped a lot of larger organizations such as NYU Shanghai and also Shanghai Disney. So when Shanghai Disney Resort coming to China and open up the resort, they needed to basically hire more than 10,000 people out of 70,000 people. And in order to really attract all the talent, they came to me and they said, we wanted to have a localized branding strategy and also branding campaign that not just representing Mickey Mouse, which everybody know, it's a very global brand, but they say we wanted to have something that is authentically Disney, but uniquely Chinese. So we want not only Mickey, but also Simba, which is more sort of coming from a global perspective. Mulan, obviously she's Chinese, and Elsa and the Snow White and Seven Dwarfs, because Snow White obviously is a very good example for female leadership. That's a joke. So anyway, so when it came to me, they say, we wanted to have this very Chinese touch. Can you make it really occur and also engaging with the Chinese audience? And so did a lot of research. After a year later, we came up with this strategy, was utilizing the Chinese paper cut. So I can see there's a lot of care and also respect and research into the culture and also customs from China. So I would suggest any company, whether you're going to Chinese market or any other market, making sure you're coming from a perspective of understanding the culture first before you do the investment. If you only do investment because the market is big, no matter how much money you pour into it, it's got to be a big hole. It's never-ending big hole because fundamentally you're not doing it right. Fundamentally, you're only there to get people's money. And guess what? Any business is people to people. Any business decisions are made by people. People can tell if your intention is not pure and your intention is not authentic. People can tell. People are smart. And the thing I feel that Jack Ma once said, it's not B2B, whether it's B2B or B2C, it's always P2P, it's people to people. And best example that I can find in China is Dashan, which if you guys live in China, you probably know this Canadian guy who is amazing, and he was probably the very first Westerner that coming to China and was embraced and also loved by billions of Chinese people. And he speaks fluent Chinese. And it's really interesting. I just found out today his English name is Mark Rosenberg. And I had no idea because his Chinese name is Dashan. It's coming from the big mountain, but I just consulted with Bessie, and it's coming probably from the notion of Kan Dashan, which talks a lot. And he's a comedian, and he speaks fluent Chinese. So any brand approach him, any brand he represents for, people will just buy into it because people love him and he understood the culture in the first place. So that's my take.
And so I hear this theme of truth coming out in what you're saying. At the one hand, you got to be true to who you are, but you've also got to be true to the market and the culture that you're going.
Absolutely, yeah.
So let's talk about a couple of cases that kind of help bring some of your advice to life. First, let's look at a case of a company that perhaps didn't meet with the results they were looking for entering the Chinese market, and that's Uber. Sally, would you kind of kick us off?
For Uber?
Yeah.
Well, I think, I live in the Silicon Valley, so I've seen how Uber grew in the US. And when I first went into China, I think, for every company entering a new market, you need to do your market analysis. Didi, Kuaidi was already there. They were in the taxi market and moving up to the private car services. So when Uber entered, they were facing this paramount of competitors that's already, somewhat established and developing the market before Uber entered. So Uber was burning $1 billion a year in China, as many of you know. I think, Bessie and I were talking about this is to say maybe they have gone in with the expectation that they can just overnight overtake the market. So they spend a lot of capital, they hire the right teams, to tackle that market. I think one thing that they probably didn't pay attention as much to, which is, I think, in my view, very different from the Western market, is to truly giving financial incentives to your local teams, right? And the best people in China, they're very entrepreneurial. If they can start their own company, compete with Uber, why would they come to work for you? Right. So as a founder, a Western company going into China is to say, how do I set up the right incentive system for my local team that they feel is ownership? They need to develop product suitable for the local market. They need to develop that. And I want to mention Fosun as a case. We invested in a lot of companies overseas. We typically leave 30 to 40% ownership to the management. So I think that maybe that's one thing, in my view, Uber could have done slightly different, is to give more incentives to the local team and more autonomy to the local team as well. And I want to hear other panelists.
Yeah, if I can add, add to what Sally has said, and also what Yiying said earlier about being Chinese and localized. Now, Uber is an interesting case. Uber actually registered in China as a Chinese company. I don't know how many of you know. They actually registered as a Chinese-owned company. The legal representative is Chinese, and they use mostly Chinese in their local management. So you can argue that, hey, they are Chinese, right? They localize, right? But I think what they made a mistake of, trying to be Chinese for the sake of being Chinese. But their model itself is still not tailored to that market. We, in the agency world, in the marketing world, we're all like loyal Uber users. So all of us were wondering why Uber made the same mistake that most of the international brands will make when they come to China, which is, this is a 1.4 billion people market. I want 1.4 billion people riding Uber. Why can't you chunk it down to a manageable size of, this market and start from there? Uber actually dominated the super premium sector of the share rides in China. And they're doing actually very well, and the profit margin is very high. But because they wanted to have their flags all over China, so they wanted to expand very quickly and crazily. And they, in order to attract people and also compete with the competitors, as Sally was talking about, they gave away subsidies. So once you gave away subsidies to the riders, you cannot take it back. So that's where it kept burning money for them. But if you look at the super premium sector of share rides, it actually delivers fantastic profit for you. So going back to what Yiying said earlier, if you in the audience, you really are prepared to come to China, don't try to think that there's 1.4 billion people. Let me just get 1.4 billion people all use my product. It's not going to happen. You need to find your market niche, and you need to find your market entry and work on that first. And then don't go in as a super high-profile company. Immerse yourself into that market. Try to understand what's so different about this market. I don't like the phrase that China is different. I don't like it. China, in many cases, very much the same as the part of the world, but they do have their unique places, and you gotta submit yourself into the market and study it and tailor some of your offering to that market.
China is not a segment. China is a market. And it's interesting how companies kind of lose that focus that might have been crystal clear and sharp in segmenting a Western market. Yeah. And perhaps it's just that grand allure of a market that huge. Why don't we talk about a company that so far is perhaps having more success, and that is WeWork. Who'd like to volunteer? Who'd like to kind of dive in and talk about WeWork first?
You go.
I think WeWork has been very thoughtful in their approach of the Chinese market, right? To Bessie's point, in the US, if you come to pitch the VC and you say, this is a gigantic market, say healthcare in the US is a $7 trillion market, it's not going to fly. So you can't just look at the market, just the overall size and the number of populations. I think WeWork has analyzed which market is the best fit for them, given their brand and their brand image in the Valley that's collaborative, innovative. They actually set up a more premium model in China, and they stay in that model. If you go down the value chain, there are Chinese companies that can run things much cheaper, much faster than any of the Western companies can, right? They reiterate, like Xiaomi, they were reiterated their software every day, literally. They can do that. And in the West, it's different kind of pace. So you really have to analyze what's your competitive advantage in that market. And I think WeWork has done a fantastic job in that.
Yeah, we actually base our office out of the WeWork flagship property in Shanghai. What they've done quite smartly is they went in and picked the traditional old lane house in Shanghai and then convert it beautifully. Yeah. That's the China touch that Yiying was talking about.
Absolutely. I'm actually friends with the community manager at WeWork headquarters in New York, and also literally just recently met with the director of the Great China. And what I really was impressed is not only the hardware, which is the house and I mean in terms of decoration of the house, but also the software, which is they kept the global consistency, the global brand consistency of WeWork. But in the same time, they had this unique, localized touch. They had artworks from local market. They get local Chinese artists to contribute with the interior design, etc. So I think there's all these little things that, more importantly, it's the community. So they really try to engage with the community. So even though there's already a lot of Chinese, they call this the Chinese copycat. There's a company called YouWork. You know, they basically copy the same interior design, everything. But you can't really get the same spirit, which is really the core of the value proposition, the ideology of the brand. And I think that's extremely important.
So we hear these recurring themes: community, connection, culture really being the thing that ties it together. And so I'd like to go to an audience question, and I think, you know, as we recognize the importance of culture, how do you go about understanding the culture? I mean, that's a huge question, but where do you start?
I mean, start with pop music and TV shows and maybe comedy. I think a lot of times start with the language first. If you truly wanted to understand the country, maybe start with their food. Maybe start with dumplings. I don't know. Chinese xiaolongbao. A lot of times I think food really unites people. This is kind of not relevant, seemingly not relevant, but I think it is actually really relevant. The real way of connecting with people is through the thing that we have in common, which is we all need to eat.
Yeah. I think in the startup context, right, if you are thinking of whether you should go into China, that's the first question you should ask is, why do you even want to go there to start with?
Yeah.
And talk to some of your investors who had exposure to the Chinese market. You know, Kleiner Perkins and EA, many of the big names, Sequoia, they have investment team in China well established. And if you can make any, you know, that's probably the easiest way and the least risky way, get some exposure. And then talking to your other entrepreneur friends and see what their experience they have. You know, who would they recommend that you should be working with or talking to, and then make trips out there. There's nothing like doing market research in the market, just like you would do in Europe, in US. You need to get there. You need to get into the market.
And my advice will be start by spending 6 months in China, but be careful where you pick. Because, you know, if you're a startup, right, it's not just only Beijing. We have more than one Silicon Valley in Beijing. There's Beijing, there's Shanghai, there's Hangzhou, there's Fujian, there's Shenzhen, there's Chengdu. There are actually multiple cities, so be careful where you pick and just immerse yourself in there.
So we're down to the final 2 minutes, but there's some other really great questions coming in.
Okay.
And you know, one of the things we haven't talked about yet is regulation. Now we can't, in a minute and 45, there's only so much we can say, but real hot button. You know, what are the things that an organization needs to be most attuned to with respect to the regulatory environment?
First of all, I disagree with the way saying that China is more regulated elsewhere. No, it's not. Okay. To start, there's no privacy law in China. There's no privacy law in China. So if you're in the privacy business, you know, that's a great place to start. So it's not more regulated in China. But it is a one-party state that you need to be careful, because in China, the party sits above everything else, including the government, including the law. So it's not the law that sits above everything else. So you need to study the party. How is the party operated? Why is party important in that country? You need to get that clear.
Okay, with 1 minute left, I'm going to ask you each to do a lightning answer to this question. If there's one thing you should not do at all costs, what is it? Yiying.
Oh, can I be the last? I have to think about it. Thank you.
Anybody?
I'll start. Ask yourself, are you sure are you prepared to come to China? That'll be my first.
Okay.
Well, jump into the market too soon. You know, it's a commitment. It's a big market. There is no shortage of capital. So if you think you're well capitalized, that's not a good reason going to China. There's plenty of money throwing around in your competitors, etc. So do at least 6 months of market research, if not over a year, depending on which market you're in. So be thoughtful before you get there.
That's really what I thought. No, actually, this is one of the things I think. I was thinking about the recent Airbnb HR example. I don't know if you guys are aware of it. So apparently, just recently, there's a HR sort of thing happening in Airbnb China in Beijing. So the leadership team was being questioned by the entire team in Beijing. So basically there was some, sort of not necessarily happy thing going on in the leadership, and the engineers are feeling very hostile because of the leadership team. And they were also questioned the HQ, which is Airbnb in Silicon Valley in San Francisco. I mean, Airbnb is such an amazing company, and I really love every single thing about the company. But I think, unfortunately, the China team, a lot of times it's remote from the headquarters. So I think a lot of times the headquarters really need to take care, no matter how far away it is, you really need to take care of the people. You have to make sure that the people, whether it's the leadership team or the people underneath the leadership, their happiness level. So basically, the headquarters was kind of ignoring this for a while, and which result that this became a big problem now. And so I hope that more and more companies are aware of this entire ecosystem, especially the leadership.
Thank you. So know the market, make sure it makes sense for your business to be there, and tread very, very thoughtfully and carefully. That is a totally simplistic summation of what was a really terrific panel. So Bessie Lee, Sally Zheng, Yiying Liu, thank you very much.
Thank you,
Thank
Paul,
you.
for moderating. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.